What's going on, everybody? Mr. Octagonal here. Happy Saturday. It's Super Bowl Saturday, the day before the big game. But we got bigger and better things to go over, as we got my third 2020 NFL mock draft. This one is actually going to be 3 rounds. The first 2 mock drafts I did were 2 rounds. This one's going to be 3. And then I think probably all mock drafts going forward after this one might include trades. I don't really know. We'll have to see. But without further ado, let's get right on into it. Just so everybody gets a clear understanding, these mock drafts are what I think will happen. I'm not agreeing with every single one of these picks. I'm just predicting what's going to happen in the future. I think down the line, I might have a couple mock drafts where I step in as every GM and I make the picks. I think that video would probably get a lot of hate, but let's just go with it. So with the first pick, the pick that I do agree with, the Bengals are going to get Joe Burrow, quarterback of Oklahoma. I said in my first mock draft, I do not expect this pick to change at all leading up to April, and that prediction stands. I don't see any reason why the Bengals don't pick Burrow. He had one of the greatest seasons in college football history for a quarterback, and I think he has a chance to be something special in this league. He has that swagger and that mentality that you want in your franchise quarterback. I think he's very NFL ready. He's actually older than Lamar Jackson, the likely NFL MVP, which is announced tonight. I'd be very surprised if it isn't Lamar Jackson. And even though Burrow is older, Burrow has a chance to really compete in that division with Lamar Jackson for these next decade or so. And even Baker Mayfield, too, if he can develop. You can never count out the Steelers. So I think that AFC North is going to be really fun for years to come, as long as the Bengals can build a competent roster around Joe. With the second pick, another selection I do not expect to change leading up to the draft. The Redskins get Chase Young, edge rusher, Ohio State. I think this one is a little bit more in limbo because who knows with trades. Some team like the Dolphins could be desperate to move up to pick a quarterback. Maybe they think the Lions really like Tua Tagovailoa, which I don't think the Lions will be picking a quarterback, but that's besides the point. Chase Young is the best player in this draft class, talent-wise. And I think he might be the best player I've scouted in the history of my NFL draft scouting. And I haven't done a ton of scouting. I have for the past, I would say, 5-6 years. But of those past 5-6 years, I don't know many better prospects that are better than Chase Young. Maybe Myles Garrett. Maybe Jadeveon Clowney. I didn't really do a ton of scouting in 2014. I think that's the first year I started making mocks, but I didn't really know the players all too well, so I'm not going to count Clowney. And then I guess 2015 and on, the only player who I think can compete with Chase Young's talent coming out of college is Myles Garrett. And if Chase Young can play like Myles Garrett has to start his career, I'm sure Washington would be thrilled. With pick 3, the Lions, this is where the draft really begins for me, and I am a Lions fan, which makes this interesting. I was getting Jeff Okudah, cornerback LSU. This pick very well could be traded, and I wouldn't be surprised if it is. Miami at 5, even the Chargers or Panthers could also look to move up if they're sold on Tua or Herbert, or maybe even Jordan Love if his stock were to increase during the combine. But nonetheless, I think this would be a good pick for the Lions. They need another corner alongside Darius Slay. Personally, I'd pick Isaiah Simmons here, but I would not be mad if we got Okudah. And I wouldn't be surprised if we trade down to 5 and everybody who we're really considering here is still on the board. Obviously, whoever would move up here would pick a quarterback. And then the Giants, I mean, they could look at a guy like Okudah or Simmons, but I think they need to focus on their offensive line more, which brings us to the Giants at pick 4. They're going Jedrick Willis, tackle from Alabama. I think they could look defense here. I had them going Okudah in my last mock. I wouldn't be surprised if they were to do that if he was available. I wouldn't be surprised if they go Isaiah Simmons. A better version of Jabril Peppers, I would say, when it comes to versatility. And I guess Simmons is more of a linebacker than Peppers is. But nonetheless, I do think that they'll go with Wills, who has probably, other than Joe Burrow, been the biggest riser this season in this draft class. And I think he has cemented himself, at least as of right now, as the top tackle in the draft this year. Pick 5, I have the Miami Dolphins selecting Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback from Alabama. I've had the Dolphins getting Tua in all 3 of my mock drafts, and I think this makes sense. And what we heard from Tua's interview that he had on Thursday, it sounds like he wants to go to Miami, so it makes sense. He also said he didn't want to go to Detroit, which is fine by me because I don't want Tua. But I think this is a match made in heaven for both sides. The Dolphins have been eyeing Tua up for years. They had a full-on tank this year, I think, so they could get Tua. And I won't be surprised if they trade up just to be safe. But in this mock, there are no trades, and they get him at pick 5. There are a lot of concerns with Tua. Obviously, medical red flags for sure. And I don't think he's as good of a prospect as people think he is. I think a healthy Joe Burrow is a little bit better as a prospect than a healthy Tua Tagovailoa, which I know most people would probably disagree with me there. I'm just not sold on Tua's arm strength, and while he does have phenomenal instincts, phenomenal accuracy, I just don't know if he has that crazy ceiling that you'd want. Not that I think Burrow has a Patrick Mahomes-like ceiling, but I don't know. I feel like there's something off with Tua, whether it's his mechanics or his arm strength. I don't think he's the perfect prospect that everyone thinks he is, or at least before injury. Pick 6, Chargers get Justin Herbert, quarterback from Oregon. I've had the Chargers going with Herbert in all 3 mocks. He had a good week at the Senior Bowl, and while Herbert does have a lot of doubters, I have him as my number 2 quarterback in the class. Partly because I don't think Tua deserves to be number 2. I don't think Jordan Love deserves to be number 2. So I'm not totally sold on Justin Herbert by any means, and I am an Oregon Ducks fan, and I'm not sold on Herbert. I think he's a good quarterback. I don't think he's a great quarterback. I do think he has a little bit higher of a ceiling than Tua just because of the arm strength, and he does have mobility. Tua does too, but I think Herbert has the lower floor. He definitely does not have the instincts and the awareness that Tua has. And I think he may be a little bit more raw than Tua outside of the injury concerns that Tua has. But I think Herbert's not quite NFL ready, and I think the Chargers should look to get a bridge quarterback to start next season. I don't think that bridge quarterback will be Phillip Rivers. He seems as good as gone. They have Tyrod Taylor on the roster. I don't think that's a bad option. I think Tyrod Taylor was extremely underrated in his time with Buffalo. They could always look to sign someone as well. There have been Tom Brady rumors. I don't think Tom Brady's going to sign with the Chargers, nor do I think he's leaving New England in general. But nonetheless, I do think they should get a bridge quarterback to start before they transition to Herbert. Pick 7, Isaiah Simmons, linebacker to safety, hybrid. He can play anywhere on the defense out of Clemson. He is my number 2 player in this draft class. I love Isaiah Simmons. He can just do so much. He's a freak athlete. He's going to destroy the combine. And I think this is a home run for Carolina. They just lost Luke Kuechly to retirement, and they need a new face of this defense. I absolutely think it's Isaiah Simmons. He flies all over the field for Clemson. Absolute steal here at 7. And then pick 8, Cardinals get Mekhi Becton, offensive tackle from Louisville. His stock has skyrocketed this past month. And in my first mock draft, I had him going 14 to the Bucs. A lot of people disagreed. A lot of people said, oh, he's a second-round prospect, but no, I realize that this kid is special. He's extremely talented. He's going to have a great combine as well. And here we are. Some people think he's going to be the first tackle taken. I still think that'll be Jedrick Wills. But I think Becton has passed Andrew Thomas. I think he's passed Tristan Wirfs. And this would be a great selection for the Cardinals. They could look at wide receiver. They could look at CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy. But personally, I think they will go with Becton so Kyler doesn't run for his life. And I think this is a good pick for the Cardinals. If I was them, I probably would go Mekhi Becton in this situation. Next up, we got the Jacksonville Jaguars. And in my last mock draft, the 2 guys I had Jacksonville getting in the first round were K'Lavon Chaisson and Jeff Gladney. And a lot of Jags fans really disagree with that. And honestly, I think that'd be a good draft for Jacksonville. Chaisson and Gladney are both going to have phenomenal combines, and I think their stocks are really going to increase these next couple of months. But nonetheless, with Derek Brown falling, I do think they go with Brown over a guy like K'Lavon Chaisson, who I did consider here. But Brown has been super productive at Auburn, and he's probably the best player on the board. Probably not on my personal draft board. I'm not as high on Brown as others. I think Brown's a good player, but I don't know if he's necessarily worth a top 10 pick. And if the Lions were to pick him at 3, which could be a realistic scenario, I wouldn't really be too thrilled with that selection. But nonetheless, I don't think this is a bad pick for Jacksonville. It is a safe pick. They get a guy in the interior of their defensive line next to Taven Bryan, next to Calais Campbell. Got Josh Allen rushing the quarterback. I think they'll probably want to add another edge rusher this offseason unless they re-sign Yannick Ngakoue, which is highly unlikely. Pick 10, Tristan Wirfs, offensive tackle, Iowa to the Browns. They need offensive line. Enough said. Wirfs has been a very good player at Iowa. I think he'll have a good combine too. A lot of ultra-athletic offensive linemen in this class. This is a really fun offensive tackle class. And Tristan Wirfs, seems like offensive tackle number 2 throughout this whole draft process with Andrew Thomas number 1. But the past couple weeks, I think with Jedrick Wills passing them and Mekhi Becton now entering the mix, I think Wirfs, while his stock hasn't necessarily dipped, I do think he won't be the second tackle taken in this class. And that's not a knock on Wirfs by any means. I think this is a really good pick for the Browns at 10. Pick 11, CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Oklahoma to the Jets. Lamb is a dynamic playmaker. And who's the best receiver in this class, CeeDee Lamb or Jerry Jeudy? That's a really tough question. I think it's Jerry Jeudy by a hair. But this is not a bad pick for the Jets. CeeDee Lamb probably has a higher ceiling. Probably the highest ceiling for any wide receiver in this draft class. They could look at offensive line. They could look at a guy like Andrew Thomas. But for now, I do have them going with CeeDee Lamb. Get themselves a potential game-changing receiver for Sam Darnold. Pick 12, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver, Alabama to the Raiders. In all 3 mock drafts I've done now, I have had Jeudy going 12 to Las Vegas, sorry. Gotta get used to that. That feels weird. Las Vegas Raiders. Anyway, I can't see Jeudy falling past this pick, and sort of like the Jets, the Raiders need that dynamic playmaker at wide receiver for Derek Carr, or whoever the face at quarterback will be these next few years. And the Raiders have a better receiving core than the Jets. Tyrell Williams is solid. Hunter Renfrow had a good rookie year, but the Raiders need that guy. They thought it was going to be Antonio Brown. It was not. And I think it now can be Jerry Jeudy, and I think this will be a great pick for Oakland. Not Oakland, Las Vegas. Oh my goodness. How many times am I going to call them Oakland today? Pick 13, Jordan Love, quarterback, Utah State to the Colts. In my past 2 mocks, I have had them getting Jordan Love in the second round with their first second-round pick, which is the Redskins second-rounder at pick 34. But the more I think about it, I don't see Jordan Love falling to the second round. I mean, I think he's going to have a really good combine. He has a lot of great athletic traits. While he does not have the instincts that you'd want in a quarterback, I think he's very raw. And I think he's a lot like Josh Allen, but a little bit worse. I don't think he's as good of a prospect as Josh Allen. I don't think he quite has the frame or the arm strength. But I do think there is a lot of similarities there. And I think he's a very raw quarterback. The Colts already have their bridge starter for next year. Jacoby Brissett is easily a top 32 quarterback in the NFL. I don't think he's a guy you can build a Super Bowl contender around, which is why the Colts are getting a boomer bust type player in Jordan Love. But as Love develops, I think Jacoby Brissett is a fine starter. Pick 14, K'Lavon Chaisson, edge rusher from LSU to the Buccaneers. I can't really see Chaisson going any later, especially considering I think he's going to have a monster combine. But there are a number of ways the Bucs could go here. They could always go with a guy like A.J. Epinesa. They could look at the offensive line. Andrew Thomas is still on the board. Josh Jones had a monster Senior Bowl. They could look at a guy like Grant Delpit or even Xavier McKinney, who has really flown under the radar as one of the most underrated players in this draft. But I do have them going with Chaisson. Reminds me a lot of Brian Burns out of last year's class with that just dynamic speed and athleticism off the edge. Both Burns and Chaisson aren't the best run stoppers, but they're phenomenal at getting to the quarterback, and Burns had a great rookie season last year. I think if the Bucs are getting a clone of Brian Burns, I think they'd have to be thrilled. Pick 15, Andrew Thomas, offensive tackle from Georgia to the Broncos. Seems like NFL scouts are not as high on Thomas as the media and mock drafts might suggest, which is why he falls here to pick 15. But the Broncos need a franchise tackle. Garrett Bowles, he ain't it, Chief. He's either a revolving door allowing sacks or he's getting called for a holding penalty. It seems like it's one or the other with him. And that was just a waste of a first-round pick. So the Broncos need to get themselves their franchise tackle. They could look at receiver, could look at a guy like Henry Ruggs to complement Courtland Sutton. But for right now, I think you just got to improve that offensive line for Drew Lock, who I think is this team's franchise quarterback. He showed a ton of potential last year. I think there are some people who are overrating Locke. Some people think he's going to be like a top 10 quarterback next year. I think that's stretching it a little bit, but I do think the Broncos have their franchise man in Mr. Locke. Pick 16, A.J. Epinesa, edge rusher, Iowa, to the Falcons. I think this pick will likely come down to Epinesa or Christian Fulton, or at least for the time being. I have them going with Epinesa, old school edge rusher. Not that dynamic speed and dynamic athleticism that everybody has, but Epinesa is a well-rounded player. I think he has a very high floor. He can stop a run. He can get to the quarterback. And what the Falcons have really done these past couple years is drafting these new school speed rushers like Vic Beasley, like Tack McKinley, and it hasn't really worked out. I still think McKinley has a ton of potential, but I think the Falcons are really going to learn from their mistakes and go for a different type of pass rusher in Epinesa. Now on to the latter half of the first round, starting with pick 17, the Cowboys select Javon Kinlaw, interior defensive lineman out of South Carolina. I think the Cowboys got to go defense with this pick. I think their offense is fine. I think they got to re-sign Dak Prescott. I've always thought Prescott was super overrated, but I think he had a really good year this year. And I think Dak actually does not get enough respect. I know there are people that think he's elite, and he's not, but there are also people that think he's a bad starting quarterback, which, just based off this year, I don't think he is. I think the stats are a little bit inflated because the Cowboys pass the ball way too much, but nonetheless, I think Dak has proven to me that he's a quality quarterback. So I don't think you got to worry about that. I think you just got to pay the man his money. I expect them to re-sign Amari Cooper, and I expect them to let Byron Jones go, which I would probably re-sign Jones over Cooper, if we're being honest. But assuming Jones does walk, that opens up a hole at corner. They also have a hole at safety. I think they could use interior defensive line and edge rusher. So the Cowboys have a number of ways they could go here. With Epinesa gone, that pretty much eliminates edge rusher. In the secondary, they could look at a guy like Christian Fulton, Jeff Gladney, maybe one of the other corners, C.J. Henderson and Trayvon Diggs. And then safety, Grant Delpit or Xavier McKinney. But I have them going with Kinlaw. Just get themselves a rock in the middle of their defensive line. Put him next to DeMarcus Lawrence. Put him in front of those talented linebackers in Jalen Smith and Leighton Vander Esch. Kinlaw is a very well-rounded player. He can stop a run. He can get to a quarterback. He had a great Senior Bowl week. And I think this is a very good pick for Dallas. Pick 18, Josh Jones, offensive tackle from Houston. Speaking of guys who had great Senior Bowls, I think Josh Jones has cemented himself as a first-round pick. It seems like he was a borderline first or second-round guy these past couple of months. But I think he's a set first-round pick now. The Dolphins need offensive line pretty bad. I think that goes without saying. And I have them getting Jones at 18. Pick 19, Patrick Queen, linebacker, LSU, to the Raiders. His stock has absolutely risen since really the end of the season. He had a great college football playoff. He flies over the field. I think he is the second off-ball linebacker taken in this class. Technically the first, because I don't think Isaiah Simmons really has a position. So if you don't count Isaiah Simmons, I think Queen is the first off-ball linebacker in this class, and for good reason. I think he's past Kenneth Murray. I think this is a very nice pick for Oakland, who has not had a good linebacking core in years. Pick 20, Christian Fulton, cornerback, LSU, to the Jags. This pick could be a guy like Jeff Gladney, but for right now I have them going with Fulton, who's a little bit safer of a prospect. Fulton has a higher floor, and I think he has very low bust potential. I don't think he'll be a superstar, but I do think this is a pretty nice pick for Jacksonville. Pick 21, Henry Ruggs III, wide receiver, Alabama, to the Eagles. Speed, speed, speed. A lot of comparisons to Deshaun Jackson, and I think he'll be a little bit better than Deshaun Jackson. I guess a prime Deshaun Jackson, not current, because current Deshaun Jackson can only play like 3 games before getting hurt. But since Jackson cannot stay on the field for this Eagles team, or at least he couldn't last year, I think getting a speed demon in Ruggs who can stretch the field would be big. I would not be surprised if he goes in the top 15, or maybe even in the top 10, sort of like John Ross a few years ago. Do I see Ruggs breaking that 40-yard dash record? No, but I think Ruggs is going to have one of the fastest 40 times at this year's Combine. Pick 22, T. Higgins, wide receiver from Clemson to the Bills, big-bodied receiver, different than Henry Ruggs, in a lot of ways, but I think T. Higgins is still a very good prospect. He's still athletically imposing, gigantic frame, good in those jump ball situations and reminds me a lot of Kenny Galladay. I think the only difference is that T. Higgins is probably going to be a little bit faster and will probably test a little bit better at the combine. But he reminds me a lot of Galladay, which I think is a perfect fit for Buffalo. I mean, you got let's look at the Lions for a second. You got Matthew Stafford, strong arm quarterback. The Lions are best when they're stretching the field. And what have the Lions done? They've given him deep threat receivers in Galladay and Marvin Jones. The Bills, let's look at the Bills. Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen is a young Matthew Stafford. I think Josh Allen has a lot of athletics and I guess overall similarities to Stafford when he was young. I mean, they both had those cannons of arms. They were both somewhat mobile. Allen a little bit more willing to run than Stafford. But I think giving him his Kenny Galladay and T. Higgins makes total sense. Pick 23, Grant Delpit, safety, LSU to the Patriots. I would not be surprised if this pick is Xavier McKinney, but for right now, it is Delpit who falls to 23 for whatever reason. I think he should still be a top 15 pick. And this safety class reminds me a lot of the 2018 one. I think Grant Delpit is your Derwin James, Xavier McKinney is your Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I think those are actually fair player comparisons for both of them. Derwin James was my number one player at the beginning of the 2018 draft season, and that's the same for Delpit. He was the number one player at the beginning of my board for this college football season. They've both slipped a little, and I think they'll have a surprise slip during the draft, and the Patriots get an absolute steal here at 23, just like the Chargers did at 17. And then McKinney, meanwhile, I think is a lot like Minkah Fitzpatrick, but we'll probably dive deeper in there when we get to his pick. And then pick 24, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver, LSU to the Saints. He had a phenomenal year. He was so productive for the Tigers. He was excellent in the playoff. And the Saints finally get a very good receiver to line up next to Michael Thomas, making him even more dangerous than he already is, which is quite scary. Who will the Saints quarterback be next year? Will it be Breeze? Will it be Bridgewater? Heck, there are rumors suggesting that they will start Taysom Hill, which I don't think they should, but whoever the quarterback is, I'm sure they'll appreciate having one of the better receiving tandems in the league. Next up, we got the Minnesota Vikings here at pick 25. I have them getting Jeff Gladney, cornerback TCU. They could look at Stefan's younger brother, Trayvon Diggs. They could also look at a guy like C.J. Henderson. And heck, maybe even they consider a guy like Bryce Hall, who has first-round talent but has only slipped because of injury. But for right now, I have the pick being Gladney. I think his stock will soar during the combine. And I could totally see him being the third cornerback taken in this class. Gladney's one of my favorite players, too, in this draft class. Sort of similar to Darnell Savage, extremely athletically explosive. And both of those guys were supposed to be mid-round picks. And then Savage just jumped up to the first round right at the end. And I think Jeff Gladney will be similar. But the only difference is I think that we're going to catch on to Gladney a lot sooner. I've had Gladney going in the first round in all three mock drafts. I think I had him going to the Vikings in my first one. And then the last one, as I mentioned earlier, I had him going to Jacksonville at 20. So I think this will be a really nice pick for Minnesota. Pick 26, Cesar Ruiz, interior offensive lineman from Michigan. The Dolphins need offensive line. Again, Ruiz is a raw prospect. Josh Jones is more of that safe, proven guy. Ruiz has a higher ceiling, but he also has a higher floor. One of the youngest players in this draft class, too. Ruiz has really risen, it seems like, these past couple weeks, and he could be the first interior offensive lineman taken. I mean, there's been a number of guys who have had themselves as the top interior lineman in this class. First, it was Creed Humphrey. Then he returned to school. For a while, it was Tyler Biadasz out of Wisconsin. Yes, that is how you pronounce his last name. And it seems like his stock has dropped. Then we were looking at guys like Nick Harris out of Washington. And now I think it's been Ruiz who has passed him. And I wouldn't be surprised if it stays Ruiz for a while. Super high ceiling. One of the highest ceilings for any of the offensive linemen in this draft class. The Dolphins could be getting themselves a potential star. Pick 27, Julian Okwara, edge rusher from Notre Dame to the Seahawks. Okwara is the type of prospect that I really like. The talent is all there, and we all know it, but just a little bit inconsistent, not super productive at times. Sort of like Rashawn Gary from last year. I do think Gary was a little bit better of a prospect, however. But nonetheless, I think this will be a great pick for the Seahawks. There are a number of edge rushers they can consider here. Terrell Lewis, Yetur Gross-Matos, Curtis Weaver. But I think of those four, I think Okwara will be the first one gone, as he should be the first one gone. Pick 28, Kenneth Murray, linebacker, Oklahoma, to the Baltimore Ravens. They need an off-ball linebacker pretty bad. Get themselves their official C.J. Mosley replacement. Murray has really risen this season as a potential first-round pick. For a while, it seemed like he was off-ball linebacker number 2 behind Dylan Moses, once again not counting Isaiah Simmons. And then for the past month, it seems like he might be the first off-ball linebacker taken, but with Patrick Queen's rise, I do think that puts him back at that number 2 spot, and I think Baltimore would be a good home for him. Pick 29, Terrell Lewis, edge rusher from Alabama, to the Titans. Give themselves an edge rusher of the future to line up next to Harold Landry. Titans got a lot of great young pieces on that defense. Rashaan Evans has been great. Jayon Brown isn't bad. Jeffrey Simmons looks like a great first-round pick last year. And then for the immediate future, Jarrell Casey is still a really good player. So this Tennessee front seven is going to be scary for a while. Pick 30, Laviska Shenault, wide receiver, Colorado to the Packers. Sort of like New Orleans, they have the dominant number 1 receiver in Devontae Adams, but they don't have a great guy next to him. And they're going to go with Shenault here, an extremely explosive player out of Colorado. I think he has a higher ceiling than a guy like Justin Jefferson, but a lower floor. And as a Lions fan, I would not be too happy about this pick because I like Shenault. I think he's going to be good. Pick 31, Jonathan Taylor, running back, Wisconsin to the Chiefs. In my past 2 mocks, I have had the Chiefs going for running back in the first round. I think the first one was J.K. Dobbins. The second one might have been DeAndre Swift. And now we got them going with Taylor. In my past 2 mocks, I've had Taylor going to the Dolphins at 26. But now since I have them getting Cesar Ruiz there, he will fall here to pick 31 to the Chiefs. All their offense is missing is a great running back. And I know their offense needs less help than their defense, but when you got a guy like Jonathan Taylor here, I think it's going to be hard to pass him up. And then pick 32, the steal of the first round, Xavier McKinney, defensive back, Alabama, to the 49ers. I've had him going to the Niners in my past 2 mocks. Now I have them getting him once again. If you want Minkah Fitzpatrick 2.0, I think that's Xavier McKinney. Phenomenal player, super versatile, pretty athletic, good ball skills, and a good all-around safety. Ton of comparisons to Minkah Fitzpatrick, and I think as long as the Niners put him at the right system and use him to his strengths, which is not what the Dolphins did, I think McKinney will be a star. Now on to the second round, starting with pick 33, the Bengals are going to select Austin Jackson, offensive tackle out of USC. The Bengals' offensive line has been a joke for a while, but they have done a nice job of building the interior of their line. Trey Hopkins looks like a gem. He's not a star, but he's quality. Billy Price, I mean, he's not that good, but maybe he develops. Jonah Williams can play tackle and guard. So I think out of interior line and perimeter offensive line, exterior offensive line, if you will, I think that's their biggest need, and that's where they're going to get Mr. Jackson, who I think has a very high ceiling. He's probably going to end up being a first-round prospect on my board, and I think this would be a great pick for Burrow and company. Speaking of guys who would be first-rounders on my board, one of my favorite prospects in this year's class is Jalen Reagor out of TCU. I love Reagor. He's so explosive, such a dynamic player, and I think this would be a steal at 34 for the Colts. It's just that this wide receiver class is so deep, and Reagor's been a little bit inconsistent, but TCU was really bad this year. And other than Reagor and Gladney, they didn't really have a lot going for them. So getting Jordan Love, an absolute speedster, and Reagor would be big. Now, they did use a second rounder on a speedster last year, Paris Campbell. Didn't play a lot this year. I think Paris Campbell still has a ton of potential, but I think Campbell's versatility makes him not really just a wideout. You can put him wideout, you can use him in the backfield, and I think he's basically your Taysom Hill, but just can't throw the ball. You're not going to put Paris Campbell at quarterback. But other than that, use him in that like X-Factor versatility role, whereas you got Reagor on the outside, T.Y. Hilton in the inside for the near future. Also, Zach Pascal is a really good receiver. So the Colts have an interesting but fun wide receiver core, and Reagor would make it even funner. Pick 35, Josh Uche, edge rusher from Michigan to the Lions. I really like this pick. I'm a big fan of Josh Uche, and he's really risen up my board these past couple of weeks. So I think he's a perfect fit with Detroit, a hybrid-type player. You can use him in a number of different ways. He impressed me during the Senior Bowl, and I think he'd be a perfect fit for this Matt Patricia defense. Pick 36, Zach Bond, edge rusher, Wisconsin, to the Giants. I had to do a full 180 here because I originally mocked CJ Henderson with this pick. But then I realized the Giants have invested so much in their corners lately. DeAndre Baker was a first-round pick. Julian Love has shown promise. Guys like Grant Haley, I know there's a few other names that are not coming to mind right now, but a lot of those guys have only been on the team for 1 to 2 years, and while they haven't played well, Giants still got to give some of those guys a little bit more time to develop. So I have them getting Bond here instead, who, kind of like Uchi, is pretty versatile. You can use him at edge. He can cover if need be. And the Giants need both off-ball linebacker and edge rushers really badly. The Giants' defense, talent-wise, on paper, is absolutely atrocious. And you can use Bond in either way. So I think this will be a pretty good pick for the Giants. Pick 37, Trayvon Diggs, cornerback from Alabama, to the Los Angeles Chargers. And they could look at O-line here, but it's the Chargers. You know they're going to neglect it. So instead I have them getting Diggs, who's a good player. The Chargers have talent at corner, but I don't think it's enough talent. Casey Hayward's not getting any younger. Desmond King's going to be on the last year of his deal. Trevor Williams is gone. And I think they need another one. And Trayvon Diggs is very physical, very talented corner. I think this will be a good pick for them. Pick 38, Jake Fromm, quarterback, Georgia to the Panthers. So now we're entering that tier 3 of quarterbacks. My opinion, you got tier 1, which is Joe Burrow, and only Joe Burrow. Then you have a gap. Then you have tier 2, which would be Herbert, Tua, and Jordan Love. And then this is where you get to tier 3. Guys like Jacob Eason, Jake Fromm, Jalen Hurts. But for right now, I do have Fromm being the pick to the Panthers. I think he'll be the first one of those 3 going, and I'd probably pick him first out of that group as well. The thing with Fromm is he hasn't really progressed since his freshman year, but he was really good as a freshman, and he was still solid as a sophomore, still really solid as a junior. So I think his lack of progression is still a little bit kind of overrated because he didn't always have the top coaching staff at Georgia because Georgia's a run-first team, and they didn't really focus on his development. They focused on the run game. They've always had guys like Nick Chubb, Sony Michel, and DeAndre Swift on this team. So I think Jacob Fromm sort of gets underappreciated a little bit. And I think this could be a great pick for Carolina, whether they get rid of Cam or not, which personally I do think they do trade Cam. If I were to guess, I'd probably say Chicago. Pick 39, CJ Henderson, cornerback, Florida, to the Dolphins. I originally had Curtis Weaver here, and now I have to make an excuse why the Dolphins are not going to get an edge rusher in this year's draft class. So here's my excuse. The Dolphins have a lot of money, and this is a good edge rusher class in free agency. I think, considering how much cap space they have, I think over $100 million, they're going to be willing to break the bank on a guy like Yannick Ngakoue or Matt Judon. And there are some other edge rushers too, and then maybe even some lower level guys who maybe want about $5, $6, or $7 million a year. So the Dolphins really might not need an edge rusher anymore. And the thing with getting pass rushers is it's really hard to find great pass rushers, but it's not hard to find good ones. There are so many quality pass rushers in this league. Shaq Barrett is another one. He'll probably get top dollar as well, but he's another guy the Dolphins could look at. So I thoroughly expect the Dolphins to sign one of those elite edge rushers, and I could see them get another mid-tier guy, and I'd probably have to look at the free agency class more in depth to see who they look at. And corner is a need too. Dolphins don't have a lot going for them at corner. They do have Xavier Howard, who did something stupid to a woman these past couple of months, but we'll say hypothetically they keep him, and I do think they will retain him. They also have guys like Nick Needham, who had a solid rookie year. Bobby McCain, more of a safety now, but he can play corner. They have Minkah Fitzpatrick. Oh, wait, he's gone. Wink, wink, because the Dolphins didn't use him to his strengths. Better use Xavier McKinney right-liners. But anyway, CJ Henderson, I could see him taking a little bit of a dip, sort of like Greedy Williams in last year's class. Reminds me a lot of Greedy Williams, who I loved. I don't think CJ is as good as Greedy Williams, but I do think a lot of scouts will probably compare the two. And then pick 40, Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver, Arizona State to the Cardinals. He's not going to travel too far, as the Cardinals have had a safety blanket at wide receiver for the past almost 2 decades in Larry Fitzgerald. And last year, they took 2 guys who can stretch the field at wide receiver, and Andy Isabella, who was kind of disappointing, and then Hakeem Butler, who did not play last year due to an injury. But I gave Butler a late first-round grade. I love Hakeem Butler. I think he's going to be a stud if he can stay healthy. But the Cardinals need that guy in the slot. Not that Larry Fitzgerald is a slot receiver, but they need that guy in the slot who can be a steady guy, who's a good route runner, and is just a safety blanket. Andy Isabella is more of a slot receiver, but he's also still a deep threat as well. And his best attribute is his speed. So I think the Cardinals have to go for a guy who's more of a route runner, more of a short pass guy like Ayuk. So I think this is a good pick for the Cardinals, and Ayuk can stretch the field as well. So I think this will be a nice pick for them. Next up, we got the Cleveland Browns selecting Antoine Winfield Jr., safety for Minnesota. All three mock drafts now I've had the Browns getting Winfield at 41, and I think he's one of the better safeties in this class, probably the number 3 safety. I think he got that first tier with Grant Delpit and Xavier McKinney. And then I think Winfield's number 3. Had a guy like Hamza Nasir Ladin declared for the draft, I'd probably have him over Winfield, but since he is staying at school, I think Winfield is that number 3 guy. You could look at a player like Ashton Davis or Brandon Jones, but I think it's Winfield. And I think his stock will increase. He had a great year this year at Minnesota, and the Browns could use safeties. Morgan Burnett is not that good anymore. Demarius Randall is a free agent. He's not anything special either. So I do think the Browns need to improve that area of their secondary. They do have some good young corners in Denzel Ward and Greedy Williams, but I think they need to start building up that safety core. Pick 42, Curtis Weaver, edge rusher from Boise State to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Weaver has been such a productive player with the Boise State Broncos, and I think the Jaguars are just missing that edge rusher, as I mentioned earlier, with the Derek Brown pick. I mean, you got Derek Brown, Taven Bryan, and Calais Campbell as more of your inside guys. You got Josh Allen rushing the passer, but who's that other edge rusher going to be? Assuming Yannick Ngakoue is gone, and judging by his Twitter posts the past month, I cannot see him re-signing there. They need a new edge rusher, and that'll be Curtis Weaver, who I think would be a very nice compliment to Josh Allen, and I think those two would be great together. Pick 43, Bryson Hopkins, tight end Purdue to the Bears. This is a weird tight end class. They could go a number of different tight ends here, maybe a guy like Cole Kmet or Thaddeus Moss, and those two actually took a dip in this mock, as there are not a lot of teams that have tight end as like a gigantic need. They have to go ahead and get a guy like Hopkins, Kmet, or Moss. The Bears being an exception, as Adam Shaheen and Trey Burton, they ain't it, Chief. So the Bears have their choice of those 3, and probably for me personally, Hopkins would be the last one of that group. This is still a fine pick, and you could order those 3 in any order, and it would be fine. If the Bears in this scenario were to take Hopkins over Kmet and Moss, it would not be a bad pick by any means. Hopkins has probably been the most steady of that group, the most consistent and most productive, so I do think this is a nice pick for them. Pick 44, Ross Blacklock, defensive tackle from TCU to the Colts. He did have an Achilles injury in 2018, but when he's on the field, he's been really, really good. His stock has certainly increased these past couple of weeks, and I could see him being the 3rd interior defensive lineman in this class over a guy like Neville Gallimore and Raekwon Davis. Pick 45, the Bucs are going to get DeAndre Swift, running back from Georgia. The running backs are starting to go off the board. We had Taylor going earlier, but now this is where I have Swift following. This is a great value pick for the Bucs. Their backfield isn't great. Ronald Jones did show some potential this year, but I don't think he's a bell cow back, as he has been disappointing. He was very disappointing as a rookie. Last year, at least, he was a little bit better. But I think you make him your change of pace back. You get DeAndre Swift to be the main back in the backfield. And I think that'd be a great tandem for this Buccaneer offense, who already has probably the best receiver tandem in the league, and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think probably only the Vikings could contend with that one with Thielen and Diggs. Pick 46, KJ Hamler, wide receiver, Penn State to the Broncos. Same pick I had in my last mock, and I think this would be a phenomenal pick for Denver. I had Hamler going to the Patriots in my first one. I think it'd be a perfect fit there. But nonetheless, I do have him slipping a little bit. But he was Penn State's offense this year. He was their main playmaker. Such a dynamic player. He's going to run a great 40 time, and he'll fit right into that slot position for the Broncos. You already got Cortland Sutton, who was great. They probably are going to need another outside receiver, but give Drew Lock a guy who can do so many things. KJ Hamler is basically last year's Paris Campbell, but probably a little bit better than Paris Campbell. Pick 47, another pick I had in my last mock, J.K. Dobbins, running back, Ohio State to the Falcons. I don't think Devontae Freeman's really the answer anymore. They nearly traded him to the Lions at the trade deadline for I think only a 5th rounder. So they weren't going to get much. And I don't think Freeman's the guy anymore. He hasn't stayed fully healthy. And even when he's on the field, he's not that game changer that he really was early in his career. And I think J.K. Dobbins, J.K. all day is for great. Gus Johnson would say. I think this would be a great fit for J.K. and good value too. Pick 48, Lloyd Cushenberry III. Interior offensive lineman at LSU to the Jets. The LSU offensive line was great this year, hence why their offense was so amazing. And the Jets need offensive line really bad. The Jets might have the worst offensive line in the league, which says something because there are some bad ones. Cleveland, Arizona, there are some bad offensive lines. Even Seattle's is terrible too. Cincinnati's has been bad for a while. They do actually have some pieces now, so Cincinnati's trending upwards. But there are some bad offensive lines in this league, and the Jets might be the worst. They didn't get one in the first round, mainly because Wirfs, Becton, and Jedrick Wills were all gone. So now they will get one, and Lloyd Cushenberry can play a little bit of guard and center. Next up, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have them selecting Yetur Gross-Matos, edge rusher out of Penn State. Sort of like Andrew Thomas, I think Gross-Matos has been a little bit overhyped by the media. I'm not saying he's overrated. I'm just saying NFL scouts probably think he's a little bit overrated, hence why he's falling here. And the Steelers need another pass rusher. They have TJ Watt, who is great. Might win the Defensive Player of the Year tonight. I'd probably vote for Chandler Jones, but if TJ Watt wins it, that's fine too. But I also got Bud Dupree, who had a renaissance season. Totally came out of nowhere after really looking like a bust as a former first-round pick, and he was outstanding. But he's a free agent. And even so, I think Pittsburgh could use another one. So getting a guy like Gross-Matos who can complement TJ Watt and maybe Bud Dupree as well, I think would be a pretty good pick for them. Pick 50, Chicago. They could look at quarterback here. But I think they still think Mitchell Trubisky's the answer. Whether he is or not, I don't think they're going to go with a guy like Eason or Hurts now. So instead, we got them going with Matt Hennessy, interior offensive lineman from Temple. He has been super productive, and I think he's really underrated. The Bears could use some work on the offensive line. It's not terrible. James Daniels looks like a good player. Cody Whitehair is good as well. He is a free agent, however. And assuming he goes, or even if he does stay, I think the Bears could use another one. Kyle Long, I believe, retired, or it seems like he's retiring. Even so, he's getting older and regressing anyway. But I'm pretty sure he did decide to hang up the cleats this past month. Pick 51, one of my favorite players in this class, Bryce Hall. Cornerback from Virginia to the Cowboys. Bryce Hall looked like he was going to be the first cornerback off the board at the beginning of the year. Then we got guys like Jeff Okudah and Christian Fulton really coming in. And with Bryce Hall's injury, he really took a dip. And I don't think it's that serious of an injury that'll hinder his NFL career. Yeah, he was out for the year at Virginia, but this isn't an ACL or an Achilles. I don't actually remember the full injury, but I know it wasn't anything serious like that. So I don't know why his stock has dipped so much. So I think this will be a phenomenal pick for the Cowboys, who need a corner, especially with Byron Jones likely leaving. And he'd be a good pairing with Chidobe Awuzie and Jordan Lewis. I believe Anthony Brown is also a free agent this offseason, so he might be gone as well. Pick 52, Isaiah Wilson, offensive tackle from Georgia to the Los Angeles Rams. I think they could use another offensive lineman, Andrew Whitworth. He's getting up there in age. Rob Havenstein, not getting any younger himself. So I do think they could use to add another tackle. There are a few options. Prince Tegoanahogo. There are a few more. Lucas Niang out of TCU. Maybe even a guy like Trey Adams out of Washington, who's been super productive outside of the medical red flags. But I do have him going Wilson, and I think this is a good pick for them. Number 53, the Eagles are going to select Noah Igonaghehe, cornerback from Auburn. I will look up how to say that name. I know I butchered that so hard, but he had a great Senior Bowl, and his stock is really increasing, and I'm going to need to know how to say his name if he's going to be a second-round pick. I'm sorry, Noah. And what I've seen from him, he does look like a good player. He was impressive during Senior Bowl week, and the Eagles need a cornerback very badly. Pick 54, another guy who had a great Senior Bowl, Bradley Ane, edge rusher from Utah to the Bills. He was excellent, and I think his stock has really sort of increased even before the Senior Bowl, and I think his Senior Bowl performance has solidified him as now a second-round prospect. Pick 55, Damon Arnett, cornerback, Ohio State, to the Atlanta Falcons. He's been a super productive corner for this Buckeyes team. Been a veteran for a few years there now, and I think he's been great for them. Falcons need another corner. They lost Robert Alford and Brian Poole last offseason. Not that any of those guys are big losses. And then all they really got now is Desmond Trufant, who's getting older, has never really stayed fully healthy. So regardless of how good Desmond Trufant is, which he's probably a little bit overrated to begin with, I think they need another corner, and that can be Arnett. Pick 56, Robert Hunt, interior offensive lineman from Louisiana. Not Louisiana State, Louisiana, for Raging Cajuns. I had the Dolphins getting Hunt at 39 in my last mock, so now they get him at 56. So Miami gets 3 offensive linemen here in the first 2 rounds, and that's because they need offensive line really bad. Their offensive line is a joke. I don't know if they really have any guy on that line who they can say, outside of Michael Dieter, who they can say is a legitimate part of their future. And now they got 4 guys who they can develop. Josh Jones, Michael Dieter, Cesar Ruiz, and Robert Hunt. The interior of the offensive line is set with Dieter, Ruiz, and Hunt. All they need is another tackle, and that offensive line might not be a joke anymore. Okay, so I've looked up how to pronounce the Auburn cornerback's last name. It is Noah Igbanogany. Alrighty, insert it into the memory bank. Better remember that, Eagles fans. Okay, so pick 57, the Houston Texans with their first selection. I'm going to have them go with Cameron Dantzler, cornerback from Mississippi State. They could look at running back here, and if Travis Etienne declared, this would probably be where he would fall. But they also need a cornerback as well, and I think Dantzler would be a pretty nice selection. They have a few options. They could look at a guy like Jalen Johnson, Troy Pride, who had a great Senior Bowl. But nonetheless, I think this would be a solid pick for them. Pick 58, the Neville Gallimore fall ends. He goes to the Vikings. Gallimore's going to have a great combine. I could totally see him being a first-round pick. But he's a lot older than some of these prospects, and with the rise of Ross Blaylock, I think his stock could drop a little bit, and the Vikings get an absolute steal. They need some help in the interior of their defensive line. Linval Joseph getting a little bit older. So this will be an absolute steal for Minnesota. Pick 59, Nick Harris, interior offensive lineman out of Washington. He's not going to have to travel too far going to the Seahawks, and as I mentioned earlier, their offensive line is not good. Jermaine Ifedi is finally gone this offseason. I know Seahawks fans have to be thrilled about that. He's absolutely terrible. And this will be a very solid selection for them here late in the second round. They're filling a need. And as Russell Wilson gets older, you got to give him a good offensive line. As his body gets older, it's going to be easier for him to get an injury. I understand that he's such a smart quarterback and avoids injuries because of his awareness and his IQ. But still, one freak injury and boom, Seattle needs a quarterback. Pick 60, Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver, Michigan, to the Ravens. I think his stock will increase with a pretty good combine, but in such deep receiver class, he falls here and the Ravens will capitalize. Their receiving core is not great. It is young. Marquise Brown showed flashes. Miles Boykin has potential. But I have them getting an absolute athletic freak here in Donovan Peoples-Jones. Pick 61, Lucas Niang, offensive tackle, TCU to the Titans. Interior offensive line seems like more of a need for them, but I do think they're going to go tackle because Taylor Lewan is not getting any younger. He has to be getting close to 30. And then Jack Conklin's a free agent. And they're going to put their priority this offseason in re-signing Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. Especially Henry, but even so, I think they'd rather re-sign a guy like Tannehill over Jack Conklin. So I wouldn't be surprised if Conklin goes. And even so, they might want to get younger there anyway, with Lewan probably nearing the end of his prime within, I would say, probably the next 2 or so years. So I think this will be a pretty solid pick for them. Pick 62, Troy Dye, linebacker, Oregon at the Packers. As a Lions fan, I am very sad that Blake Martinez will no longer be in our division, unless the Vikings or Bears sign him. He'll no longer be in our division, and we don't have to play him twice a year, which sucks, because Blake Martinez sucks. But Troy Dye, I really like Troy Dye, one of my favorite players on the Oregon Ducks, quack, quack. And he's been a staple on this defense for a few years now. There are a few different off-ball linebackers they could go with, Jordan Brooks, Marcus Bailey, Evan Weaver. But I think Dye will be the first of that group to go, as he should be. Pick 63, Jalen Johnson, cornerback of Utah to the Chiefs. I really like Johnson. I think he's very productive, and the Chiefs need a corner. I think this will be a pretty good pick for them. Johnson is one of the more underrated corners in this class, and a deep corner class. This will be nice value. And then pick 64, Justin Madubuike. Defensive tackle, Texas A&M to the Seahawks. Another pretty underrated player. Seahawks could use some interior defensive lineman. Jerron Reed is a free agent. Quentin Jefferson, who had a pretty good season, he's a free agent too. And they're not going to bring back both of those guys. Maybe one. Wouldn't be surprised if they brought back Jerron Reed, but they need a Quentin Jefferson replacement, sorry. And that can be Madubuike. Now on to the third and final round of today's mock. We're going to go through these picks a little bit quicker. Pick 65, Jordan Brooks, linebacker, Texas Tech to the Bengals. The Bengals off-ball linebacking core sucks, and they need a new one. Jermaine Pratt has potential, but they still need a guy next to him. And I think that can be Jordan Brooks, who's been pretty good at Texas Tech. Probably a guy I want to do some more researching on because he's intriguing, and I want to know more about him. Pick 66, Prince Tega Wanahogo, offensive tackle, Auburn, to the Redskins. They need offensive line help. Trent Williams, I don't think will play another down in Redskins jersey, and this can be for replacement. Probably won't be as good as Trent Williams, but at least it's something. Pick 67, Denzel Mims, wide receiver, Baylor to the Lions. Mims has been one of my favorite players in this draft class for a while, and it seems like he was going to be a 4th, 5th round pick. I had a 2nd round grade on him, and now everybody's giving a 2nd round grade on him, so I'm going to take credit for starting the Denzel Mims hype train, and I'd be pretty excited about this pick for the Lions, especially considering both Golladay and Marvin Jones only have 1 year left on their deal. I'm sure Golladay will be re-signed this offseason, but I don't think it's set in stone that we bring back Marvin Jones. Pick 68, Jonathan Greenard, edge rusher from Florida to the Jets. Last time they took an edge rusher out of Florida in the 3rd round, it didn't really work out. Ja'Kai Polite, who got cut in the preseason this past year. So they're going to get a different one in Greenard, who I think is going to be a little bit better. Doesn't say a whole lot. Pick 69. Nice. Panthers get Raekwon Davis, defensive tackle, Alabama. The Panthers need some help on the interior of their offensive line. They got some okay veterans there. Dontari Poe, Gerald McCoy, K'Wan Short. But those guys are all in that 30 range. They're not getting any younger. Got to get younger there. Pick 70. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, running back LSU to the Dolphins. I really like Clyde. Super underrated. I mean, I guess he's not that underrated because everyone thinks he's underrated now. But he's a very well-rounded back, and I think he'd be a good fit on this Dolphins team who doesn't really have a bell cow back, and I think Clyde would get a bunch of touches with this team. Pick 71, Shane Lemieux, interior offensive lineman from Oregon. I think he's been a really good player for this Duck squad, and the Chargers are picking a lineman. Yay! Pick 72, Malik Harrison, linebacker, Ohio State to the Cardinals. Very well-rounded. I really like Malik Harrison a lot. Jordan Hicks had a nice year, but the rest of our linebacking core isn't great. Hassan Reddick kind of looks like a bust. So I think they could use a guy like Harrison. Pick 73, I have the Jaguars getting Van Jefferson, wide receiver out of Florida. He's another guy who had a really, really good Senior Bowl, and the wide receiver class as a whole was excellent during the Senior Bowl week. Jefferson's a big-bodied receiver. I think he'd be a good fit on this Jaguars team. They have talent at the receiver position, but guys like Chris Conley, Keelan Cole, Marquise Lee, probably not the future. Maybe not even Dede Westbrook. I think the only guy who's set at wide receiver for this team is DJ Chark, who is one of my favorite players in the league. I love DJ Chark. So getting a guy like Jefferson across him, I think, will be a good fit. Pick 74, Solomon Kindley, interior offensive lineman, out of Georgia to the Browns. They got one lineman, but that's not going to be enough. They need another one. Austin Corbett didn't really work out. J.C. Treader, Joel Bitonio, they're both getting a little bit older. I think Kindley can learn from those guys and become a pretty good player on this team. And then pick 75 and pick 76, a pair of tackles who have really risen these past couple weeks out of low-name schools. I mean, UConn's still FBS, but they're not special. So the Colts are going to get Matthew Pert, who is out of UConn, and then the Bucs are going to get Ben Barch out of St. John's. I'm sort of putting them together. These are two other guys who I really want to do some more research on myself. I'm not going to really go into detail about them because I don't know a lot about either of them, but they seem like intriguing raw prospects who could develop into something. Pick 77, A.J. Terrell, cornerback, Clemson to the Broncos. They could use help at corner. Bryce Callahan's a good player. Kareem Jackson's more of a safety. And then Chris Harris, who is outstanding. He's also a free agent, and I don't think he's going to come back. And even if he does, he's not getting any younger, so I think they could use another one. This is pretty good value for Terrell. Pick 78, Rashard Lawrence, defensive tackle, LSU to the Falcons. They got Grady Jarrett in the interior of their defensive line, who got paid a lot of money, but they need someone next to him. So a line of A.J. Epinesa, who's going after the quarterback, Tack McKinley going after the quarterback, and then Lawrence and Jarrett That's a pretty good foursome. Pick 79, Troy Pride Jr., cornerback, Notre Dame, to the Jets. Pride played very well in the Senior Bowl, and the Jets, I think, could use another defensive back. Jermaine Johnson was an absolute flop. Brian Poole isn't anything crazy. Their safety core is good. Marcus May and Jamal Adams are great, but they need corners. And then pick 80, another team that needs corners, is the Las Vegas Raiders, as they go Darnay Holmes out of UCLA. They gave up on Garyon Conley this season, trading him to Houston for a third-round pick, which I think will be within the next probably 10 or so selections. And their Conley replacement can be Holmes, who probably won't be a number one corner, but him and Trayvon Mullen, I think that's a nice pairing. Pick 81, I got Ben Bredeson, interior offensive lineman out of Michigan, to the Las Vegas Raiders, who, as you can see, have back-to-back picks. The interior of the Raiders' offensive line needs a little bit of work. Rodney Hudson's great, but I think they could use some help at guard. Bredeson can slide right in and play right away. He'd be a great addition to help block Josh Jacobs and Derek Carr, and the quarterback that they're about to take in about 10 picks from now, spoiler alert. Pick 82, Jabari Zuniga, edge rusher from Florida, to the Cowboys. When he's on the field, Zuniga's really good. Missed a lot of time this year at Florida, but I think he's a very talented player, and I think he'd be a good addition to his pass rushing room. DeMarcus Lawrence is great. Sack numbers weren't there this year, but I still think his presence was certainly felt. And then Robert Quinn was excellent this year, but I don't think he's the long-term answer. So I think Zuniga would be a pretty good addition to this team. Pick 83, Kyle Duggar, safety from Lennar Ryan. Is that Division II? I don't even know. But Duggar has a ton of potential, and the Broncos are going to double down on secondary after getting Terrell just a few picks ago. Kareem Jackson's not getting any younger. I think he'd be a good mentor for Duggar, and then Will Parks isn't the answer either, so I think this will be a nice pick for them. Pick 84, Alex Highsmith, edge rusher from Charlotte. Big sleeper of mine. I like this pick a lot for the Rams. Their front seven is literally just going to be Aaron Donald next year because Dante Fowler's gone, Corey Littleton's gone, Michael Brockers is probably gone, and just Aaron Donald is still better than like half of the front sevens in the league, but even so, you got to get someone else there to help him out, and that can be Highsmith, who, as I said, is a massive sleeper. Pick 85, Akeem Davis-Gaither, linebacker, Appalachian State, to the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm not super familiar with Davis-Gaither, but from what I've seen from him, he seems very intriguing, and the Eagles could use some help at off-ball linebacker. Pick 86, Laiki Fotu, defensive tackle, Utah, to the Bills. I think Ed Oliver is a superstar, but you got to get someone next to him. I think Fotu can certainly be a nice compliment, as Harrison Phillips hasn't really developed. I think he still has potential, but got to see more from him. Pick 87, Jacob Eason, quarterback, Washington, to the Patriots. I'm not sold on Eason, but with this New England system, anything's possible. And while I think Brady will be a Patriot next year, in 3 years from now, I don't think we'll be saying the same. And then pick 88, Nathan Muti, interior offensive lineman from Fresno State, to the Saints. They got Eric McCoy last year, who was excellent, but I think they could use another interior offensive lineman, and that can be Mr. Muti. Final 8 picks of the day, starting at number 89, Vikings get Tyler Biadasz, interior offensive lineman out of Wisconsin. Biadasz's stock has certainly dipped these past couple of weeks, but I still think he's worthy of the third-round pick. Number 90, Marcus Bailey, linebacker, Purdue, to the Browns. He's been super productive with the Boilermakers. I think with Joe Scobert probably leaving this offseason, I think the Browns could use another one. Pick 91, Jalen Hurts, quarterback, Oklahoma, to the Raiders. I don't think Derek Carr is the long-term answer, and they want to maybe get a guy they can develop as they move to Vegas. Did I call them Oakland again? I don't know. But Jalen Hurts would be a really interesting pick for this team. I think he has a very high ceiling, but also a pretty low floor. Ravens get Darrell Taylor, edge rusher from Tennessee. I think Matthew Judon's probably gone. Not that he's bad, but the Ravens have to focus on other players they have to pay. So he can be the replacement. 93 and 94, I'll lump these two together. Cole Kmet and Thaddeus Moss, the son of Randy Moss, going to the Titans and Packers, respectively. So after one tight end goes in the first 92 picks, we have back-to-back here. I think this is great value for both teams. 95, Kenny Willekes, edge rusher from Michigan State, to the Chiefs. He can play outside, he can play inside, high motor, high effort, and I think this is a good pick for them. And then pick 96, Anthony Jennings, the final pick of the day, to the Denver Broncos. I think they could use some edge rushing depth. Von Miller isn't getting any younger either, and I think he'd be a good addition to their pass rushing room, which is already very solid with Bradley Chubb and, of course, Von Miller. So that'll end the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not already. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments. Healthy discussions only. I don't want you guys coming for my head. And as always, have a good one. Peace out.